In the autumn of 1889, the residents of Millbrook Township, Pennsylvania, gathered for what should have been a celebration. The Halbrook family had welcomed their seventh child, a daughter they named Catherine, but as the midwife cleaned the infant and handed her to Eleanor Halbrook, a shadow crossed the room that had nothing to do with the gathering dusk outside. For Eleanor knew something the celebrating neighbors did not. This child, like the six before her, was already marked for death. Not by disease, not by accident, but by a curse that Eleanor herself had woven into the very fabric of her family's existence. Eleanor Halbrook had died at the age of 24, struck down by consumption in the bitter winter of 1873. Yet here she stood 16 years later, cradling her newborn daughter, her skin pale but her eyes burning with an unnatural light. The impossible truth was this: Eleanor had found a way to cheat death, but the price demanded by the forces she had bargained with was more terrible than any grave could ever be. For every year Eleanor remained among the living, one of her children would die upon reaching her age at death, 24 years old, not 23, not 25, always 24. And as Catherine drew her first breath in that candlelit room, Eleanor felt the familiar weight of knowledge settle upon her shoulders like a shroud. This child would live exactly 24 years, and then the darkness would claim her, just as it had claimed Thomas, Margaret, William, Elizabeth, Samuel, and Mary before her. The story of the Halbrook family begins not with Eleanor's birth, but with her death. In December of 1873, Eleanor Whitmore Halbrook lay dying in the small farmhouse she shared with her husband Robert and their infant son Thomas. Consumption had ravaged her lungs for months, each breath a struggle, each day a battle she was slowly losing. The local physician, Dr. Marcus Henley, had been honest about her prospects. She would not see the new year. But Eleanor refused to accept this fate. Not because she feared death for herself, but because she could not bear to leave her baby son motherless, her husband a widower at only 26 years old. As the winter wind howled outside her bedroom window, Eleanor made a decision that would curse her family for generations to come. The old woman who answered Eleanor's desperate summons was known throughout the valley simply as Grandmother Thorne. She lived alone in a cabin deep in the woods, gathering herbs, tending to difficult births, and whispering to things that moved in the shadows between the trees. The people of Millbrook Township spoke of her in hushed tones, crossing themselves when her name was mentioned, yet they came to her when their need was great and conventional medicine had failed. Grandmother Thorne listened to Eleanor's plea with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of centuries. When Eleanor finished speaking, the old woman nodded slowly. "Death can be cheated," she said, her voice like autumn leaves scraping against stone. "But death always collects what it is owed, child. Always. The question is whether you are willing to pay the price it will demand." Eleanor, fevered and desperate, agreed, without asking what that price might be. Grandmother Thorne worked through the night, brewing mixtures from roots and fungi that grew in places where sunlight never touched. She spoke words in a language that predated the settlements, calling upon forces that had ruled the darkness long before men built churches and sang hymns. As dawn broke over the valley, Eleanor Halbrook died. Her husband wept. The neighbors prepared for a funeral. But 3 days later, as Robert sat beside his wife's body, Eleanor opened her eyes. The resurrection was imperfect. Eleanor's skin remained pale as winter frost, never regaining the warmth of life. Her breath came slow and measured, as if she had to remind herself to draw air. Her heart beat, but faintly, like an echo of what it had once been. Most unsettling of all, her shadow fell the wrong way, always pointing toward the setting sun, regardless of where the light actually came from. But Eleanor was alive. She could hold her son, speak to her husband, walk through her home as if death had never touched her. For 3 years, the family lived in cautious happiness. Robert asked no questions about his wife's strange resurrection, too grateful for her return to examine the miracle too closely. Little Thomas grew from infant to toddler in his mother's arms, never knowing how close he had come to growing up without her. Then, On a crisp October morning in 1876, Thomas collapsed while playing in the yard. He had seemed perfectly healthy moments before, laughing as he chased the chickens around their pen. But suddenly he crumpled to the ground, his small body convulsing, foam gathering at the corners of his mouth. By the time Eleanor reached him, her son was dead. He was exactly 24 months old, 2 years, the same number Eleanor had been dead before her resurrection. That night, as Robert wept over their son's small body, Eleanor heard Grandmother Thorne's voice carried on the wind. "Death always collects what it is owed, child. You cheated it of your life, so it will take payment from your blood. Each year you remain, 1 year will be claimed from those you brought into this world." Eleanor understood with horrible clarity. She had traded her natural death for her children's lives. For every year she lived beyond her appointed time, one of her offspring would die at the age she should have died. 24, always 24. But understanding the curse did not free her from it. Eleanor found herself compelled to continue living, to continue bearing children, as if the same forces that had brought her back from death now drove her toward this endless cycle of creation and destruction. Over the following years, she gave birth to 6 more children: Margaret in 1877, William in 1878, Elizabeth in 1880, Samuel in 1882, Mary in 1884, and finally Catherine in 1889. Robert noticed his wife's strange compulsions, the way she seemed driven to produce child after child, even as each one was doomed. He began to suspect that something unnatural had touched his family, but he could never bring himself to confront Eleanor directly. Instead, he buried his fears in hard work and strong drink, pretending not to notice when Eleanor spoke to shadows in empty rooms, or when she began keeping journals written in a script that hurt his eyes to look upon. The children themselves seemed unaware of their fate during their early years. They grew and played and laughed like any other children in Millbrook Township. Eleanor loved them fiercely, perhaps more intensely than any mother should, as if she could somehow pour enough love into their brief lives to make up for their predetermined end. She taught them to read from books that seemed older than they should be, sang them lullabies in languages she claimed not to remember learning, and filled their days with a desperate kind of joy that neighbors found both beautiful and unsettling. But as each child approached their 20th birthday, something in them began to change. They would grow quiet and withdrawn, spending hours staring at nothing, as if listening to voices only they could hear. They began to speak of dreams where a pale woman with Eleanor's face but different eyes would visit them, warning them to prepare for a journey. They would wake with knowledge they shouldn't possess, understanding concepts of death and sacrifice that no young person should comprehend. Margaret was the first to realize the truth about their family's curse. As her 24th birthday approached in 1901, she confronted her mother in the kitchen of their farmhouse. "I know what you did," Margaret said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I know why Thomas died. I know why I'm going to die." Eleanor tried to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she could only weep as her daughter spoke the truth aloud for the first time. "You made a bargain," Margaret continued. "You cheated death, and now it's taking payment from us. One by one, we'll die at 24, and you'll keep living, and you'll keep having children to feed to whatever it was you awakened in those woods." "I wanted to save you," Eleanor whispered. "I wanted to be your mother." "But we were never your children," Margaret replied. "We were your payment, your coin to throw into death's well." Margaret died 3 days before her 24th birthday, found in her bedroom with a smile on her face and her hands folded peacefully over her chest. There was no sign of struggle, no indication of illness or injury. She simply stopped living, as if something had reached into her chest and gently turned off the light of her soul. William followed in 1902, collapsing during harvest time as he worked in the fields. Elizabeth died in 1904, drowning in the creek behind their house, despite being an excellent swimmer since childhood. Samuel passed in 1906, his heart simply ceasing to beat as he sat reading by the fireplace. Mary died in 1908, speaking her mother's name one final time before closing her eyes forever. With each death, Eleanor aged. Not physically, for her body remained as it had been since her resurrection, but something deeper grew older and wearier within her. She began to understand that she was not merely a mother who had cheated death, but a vessel for something far more ancient and hungry. The force that had brought her back was using her as a gateway, reaching through her into the world of the living to claim the young lives it craved. Yet still she could not stop. When Mary died, Eleanor was already carrying Catherine, her seventh child. And after Catherine's birth in 1889, her belly swelled again with an eighth child, then a ninth, then a 10th. Each pregnancy was both a blessing and a curse, bringing new life into the world even as Eleanor knew she was condemning that life to an early grave. The people of Millbrook Township began to whisper about the Halbrook family. How was it possible that Eleanor, now apparently in her 40s, still bore children with the vigor of a woman half her age? Why did her children, all healthy and bright, invariably die just as they reached full adulthood? Some of the older residents remembered Grandmother Thorne and her reputation for trafficking with dark powers. They crossed themselves when Eleanor walked past and hurried their own children indoors when they saw her approaching. Dr. Marcus Henley, the same physician who had attended Eleanor's deathbed in 1873, grew increasingly suspicious as the years passed. He had examined each of the Halbrook children after their deaths and found no natural cause for their passing. Their hearts had simply stopped. Their breath had simply ceased, as if some invisible hand had reached out and snuffed their lives like candles. When he attempted to discuss his concerns with Robert, the man would only shake his head and retreat into his workshop, hammering at iron with a fury that spoke of barely contained madness. In 1895, Dr. Henley finally worked up the courage to confront Eleanor directly. He found her in her garden, tending to plants that seemed to grow too well in soil that should have been poor and rocky. "Mrs. Halbrook," he said, "I need to speak with you about your children." Eleanor looked up from the strange flowers that bloomed in impossible colors. "They're healthy," she said. "All of them." "For now," Dr. Henley replied. "But we both know that won't last, don't we? We both know what happens when they turn 24. Eleanor's hands stilled on the stems of her flowers. "I don't know what you mean." "I was there when you died, Mrs. Halbrook. I signed your death certificate. I watched your husband weep over your body. And then, 3 days later, you were walking around again as if nothing had happened. That was 22 years ago, and in all that time you haven't aged a single day." Eleanor stood slowly, her pale eyes fixing on the doctor's face. "Some people are blessed with good health." "This isn't health," Dr. Henley said. "This is something else entirely, something that demands payment in the blood of innocence." For a moment, Eleanor's composure cracked, and Dr. Henley saw something terrible in her eyes. Not evil exactly, but a kind of cosmic exhaustion, as if she had been carrying an unbearable weight for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to stand upright. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I can't stop. Even if I wanted to, I can't stop." "Then tell me how to help you," Dr. Henley said. "There must be a way to break this curse." Eleanor shook her head. "The only way to stop it is for me to die. Really die. But I can't choose that, Doctor. The thing that brought me back won't let me go until it's finished with me." "Finished how?" Eleanor looked toward the house where her younger children played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the wind like an echo of all the joy that would soon be cut short. "When I've given it enough. When I've paid back everything I owe for the years I've stolen from death." Dr. Henley left that day with a heavy heart, knowing that there was nothing medical science could do to help the Halbrook family. But he continued to document each death, keeping meticulous records of the strange circumstances surrounding each child's passing. His journals, discovered years later, would provide the only reliable account of what truly happened in that cursed household. Catherine, the seventh child, lived her 24 years with full knowledge of her fate. Eleanor had finally told her the truth on her 18th birthday, unable to bear the weight of secrecy any longer. Catherine listened to her mother's confession with remarkable calm, as if she had always known that her life was measured and finite. "I'm not angry," Catherine told her mother. "I understand why you did it, but you have to promise me something. Anything. Eleanor whispered. "When I die, you have to try to break the curse. You have to find a way to stop this from happening to the others." Eleanor nodded, though they both knew it was likely a promise she couldn't keep. The compulsion to continue living, to continue bearing children, was stronger than her conscious will. She was no longer fully human, but something between life and death, sustained by forces she couldn't control or fully understand. Catherine died on a warm spring morning in 1913, exactly 24 years after her birth. She spent her final hours in the garden with her mother, talking about the flowers that bloomed in impossible colors and the way the shadows fell in directions that defied the sun's position. As her strength faded, Catherine took her mother's cold hand in hers. "I'm ready," she said. "I can see them, you know. All the others, they're waiting for me." "Are they angry?" Eleanor asked. Catherine smiled. "No, Mother. They understand. We all understand. We were never really yours to keep." After Catherine's death, Eleanor made a desperate attempt to break the cycle. She returned to the woods where Grandmother Thorne's cabin had once stood, now nothing more than a foundation of mossy stones. She called out to the darkness, begging for release, offering to trade her stolen years for her children's lives. But the woods remained silent, and when she returned home, she found that she was already carrying her 8th child. The pattern continued relentlessly. Child after child born, loved fiercely for 24 years, then claimed by the darkness that had made Eleanor's resurrection possible. By 1920, 10 children had died. By 1930, 15. By 1940, 21. The Halbrook name became synonymous with tragedy in Millbrook Township, though few understood the true nature of the curse that plagued the family. Robert Halbrook died in 1925, his hair gone white and his mind shattered by decades of watching his children die. He was found in his workshop, clutching a letter addressed to Eleanor that simply read, "I know what you are. I know what you've done. God, forgive us both." Eleanor buried him in the family plot, another casualty of her bargain with forces beyond mortal understanding. As the years passed, Eleanor began to notice changes in herself. The compulsion to bear children grew stronger, but her capacity for love grew weaker. Each new baby felt more like an object than a person, a thing to be protected and cherished for its allotted time before being surrendered to the darkness. She found herself going through the motions of motherhood with increasing detachment, as if the part of her that was truly human had been slowly consumed by whatever had brought her back from death. The children, too, began to change. The later ones seemed to understand their fate from birth, their eyes holding a knowledge that was both ancient and terrible. They played and laughed and learned, but always with an undercurrent of resignation, as if they were actors playing roles in a tragedy whose ending was already written. By 1950, Eleanor had given birth to 37 children. 31 had already died, each one claimed by the curse at exactly 24 years of age. The remaining 6 were in various stages of their predetermined lives, the oldest approaching 23. Eleanor herself appeared no older than she had on the day of her resurrection, her pale skin unlined, her dark hair untouched by grey. But inside, she felt ancient beyond measure, hollowed out by decades of loss and the growing awareness that she had become something monstrous. Dr. Henley had died in 1943, but not before passing his records to his successor, Dr. James Morrison. Dr. Morrison had read the incredible account of the Halbrook family with deep skepticism until he began treating Eleanor's children himself. He confirmed his predecessor's observations. Each child was perfectly healthy until their 24th birthday, at which point they simply died with no identifiable cause. In 1952, Dr. Morrison attempted an intervention. He contacted university researchers, hoping that modern science might provide answers that 19th century medicine had lacked. But when the researchers arrived to examine Eleanor and her children, they found the farmhouse empty. The Halbrook family had vanished overnight, leaving behind only empty rooms and the lingering scent of flowers that bloomed in impossible colors. Local authorities launched a search, but no trace of the family was ever found. Some claimed they had seen Eleanor walking along country roads with her children trailing behind her like pale ghosts. Others swore they had spotted her in distant towns, always with a baby in her arms, and that same ageless face marked by eternal sorrow. The truth was both simpler and more terrible. Eleanor had finally understood the full scope of her curse. She was not merely condemned to watch her children die, she was meant to spread the curse wherever she went, creating new bloodlines marked for sacrifice, new generations of children born to die at 24. The force that had brought her back from death was not content with her family alone. It wanted to expand its reach, to claim more and more young lives through her unholy fertility. So Eleanor became a wanderer, moving from town to town, never staying long enough for people to notice the strange circumstances surrounding her children's deaths. She took different names, told different stories, but the curse followed her wherever she went. Children were born, loved for their brief allotted time, and then claimed by the darkness that had become her constant companion. In 1963, a researcher named Dr. Sarah Kellner began investigating reports of families across the country who had experienced similar tragedies. Children who died at exactly 24, mothers who never aged, pregnancies that seemed to occur with supernatural regularity. She traced the pattern across state lines and decades, following a trail of death and sorrow that led back to a single source, a woman who had died in Pennsylvania in 1873 and somehow returned to haunt the living. Dr. Kellner's research revealed that Eleanor had given birth to over 60 children in the 90 years since her resurrection. Each one had died at 24, each death contributing to whatever dark purpose Eleanor's existence served. But more disturbing still, Dr. Kellner discovered that some of Eleanor's children had survived their 24th birthday, not through any mercy from the curse, but because they had inherited their mother's unnatural nature. These surviving children, all daughters, had become like Eleanor, pale, ageless creatures compelled to bear children who would die young. They had scattered across the country, creating their own cursed bloodlines, spreading the contamination that had first touched their mother in Grandmother Thorne's cabin. The curse was growing, multiplying, claiming more victims with each passing generation. Dr. Kellner's investigation ended abruptly in 1964 when she died under mysterious circumstances. Her research notes were found scattered in her office, many pages missing, others damaged beyond recovery. The few fragments that survived painted a picture of a conspiracy of silence surrounding the Halbrook family and their descendants, as if some force was actively working to suppress knowledge of their existence. But the curse could not be hidden forever. In 1989, exactly 116 years after Eleanor's original death, something changed. Reports began to surface of the cursed children rebelling against their fate. Some chose suicide rather than face their predetermined death. Others fled their families, trying to escape the compulsion that drove them toward their 24th birthday. A few even turned to violence, killing their cursed mothers in desperate attempts to break the cycle. Eleanor herself was spotted that year in a small town in Oregon, appearing no older than she had in 1873, but carrying herself with the weight of over a century of grief. Witnesses described her as hollow-eyed and brittle, as if she might crumble to dust at any moment. She was accompanied by 3 young children, the youngest an infant, who cried with a sound that made listeners want to weep for reasons they couldn't understand. The witnesses were the last confirmed sightings of Eleanor Halbrook. Some believe she finally found a way to break her curse, choosing true death over the endless cycle of birth and loss. Others think she simply learned to hide better, continuing her dark work in places too remote for investigators to find. But there are those who claim that the curse has evolved beyond its creator, that Eleanor's cursed daughters and granddaughters continue to spread the contamination to new families, new bloodlines, ensuring that somewhere in the world, Children are still being born to die at 24. The farmhouse where it all began still stands in Millbrook Township, though it has been empty for decades. Local children dare each other to approach it on Halloween, whispering stories about the pale woman who still walks its empty rooms, forever waiting for children who will never come home. The garden behind the house blooms with flowers in impossible colors, their petals reflecting light that seems to come from somewhere other than the sun. And sometimes, when the wind is right and the moon is dark, people claim they can hear the sound of babies crying from inside the abandoned house. Crying for mothers who love them too much to let them live and not enough to let them die in peace. The twisted story of the Halbrook family serves as a reminder that some bargains extract a price far greater than anyone can imagine. Eleanor Halbrook thought she was choosing love over death, maternal duty over personal peace. Instead, she became an instrument of something far more ancient and hungry than human understanding can grasp. Her children were not victims of a curse, but offerings to forces that feed on the anguish of parents and the unfulfilled potential of lives cut short. In the end, Eleanor's greatest tragedy was not that she died, but that she was brought back. For in cheating death she learned that there are fates worse than the grave, and prices that no amount of love can ever fully pay.